Hello listeners everywhere. Welcome to the Archive of Audio Antiquities, a voyage into the vault of wonders on the wireless. In a moment, Simon Exton and Ken Moss will be here to speak to you.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome back to the Archive of Audio Antiquities. I'm Ken Moss.
I'm Simon Exton.
And this time we're listening to the 1966 BBC Light programme drama serial, The Slide.
(1966).
Yes. Oh, yes. This was broadcast from the 13th of February 1966 at 7 o'clock, and the next 6 episodes were broadcast weekly after that. This was written by Victor Pemberton, who most people will know as a script editor and indeed a story writer on Doctor Who.
And actor.
And actor, yes, he was that as well. And the premise is, during an abnormal heatwave in March, the air becomes thick and dull. Nothing moves. You can almost hear the silence. Something was bound to happen. Redlow, a new town in Kent, was the dream of a self-made man, Hugh Deverell MP. At a crowded and restless town meeting, Janet Marshall faints due to the stifling atmosphere. She is helped by a friend, Dr. Ken Richards, just as a sudden earthquake tears the room apart. A long, deep crack in a road is discovered nearby, and powerful tremors are felt along the south coast. When torrents of seething mud start emerging from the fissure, scientist Joseph Gomez is called in. The mud contains a special organism that can control people's minds, and it can kill. Declared a disaster area, Redlow becomes a state of emergency. Then other fissures appear.
Doctor, come quick, please.
What's the matter, Inspector? What's happened?
Oh, Ted, the old boy. He's gone from the car.
What?
Disappeared. The car door was wide open. I can't find him
But he
anywhere.
was unconscious. He can't have just walked off.
Well, he has. And if we don't get hold of him pretty soon...
What's the matter with you now, Mickey?
Shut up!
Eh?
All of you, listen. Can't you hear it?
What is it?
Give me the torch. The road. Look at the crack in the road. It's mud. A slide of mud coming out of the crack. Just look at it.
It's all right, Doug. It's all right.
Look, it's coming over the top. It's coming over the top. The mud.
This has been released on CD, which is the version that Simon and I have got. It's been repeated on BBC Radio 4 Extra quite a few times now. I think the last time was in 2020. But Victor Pemberton originally submitted this as a Doctor Who idea in 1964, which was rejected by the then script editor David Whittaker. Following revisions, it was then submitted, or it inspired Fury from the Deep. And the original story was to fear the Doctor, Ian and Barbara and Vicky discovering sentient mud invading a London fishing bay. It was also included on the DVD and Blu-ray release for the animated recon of Fury from the Deep. This stars Maurice Denham as Hugh Deverell MP, David Spencer as Ken Richards, Miriam Margolyes as Mrs. Wilson, and Roger Delgado as Joseph Gomez. And isn't he a delight?
He is. Roger Delgado is wonderful, absolutely wonderful in everything. He is there to be foreigner with a capital F in this, and a swarthy fellow who shows an interest in the MP's wife, even though all of the interest is from MP's wife, and Roger Delgado bats her back at every available opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
He's still there to be swarthy fellow.
These foreign wallers, what? Coming over here, investigating our science?
Yeah, he was either generic scientist or token foreign person. And to say that there wasn't a massive amount of characterization, it's true, there wasn't a massive amount of characterization, but there wasn't a massive amount of characterization in any of the characters. So MP is MP and nothing but. MP's bored wife is MP's bored wife and nothing but. Local doctor / vet / whatever the hell else he's supposed to do, because he seems to take on everybody's job role. There's one bit in the middle where Dr. Richard says, all these animals are dying and it's my job to find out why. I don't really think it is. If he's the local GP, probably not in his job role. But it's the 1950s. It may have been transmitted in the 1960s, but it really felt like the 1950s.
All the way through, I was really trying to convince myself that this was a new town. And all I had was Little Country Village from Doctor Who.
Yes.
I think that Holly Mill Lane and the church bell and the windmill by the stream, I couldn't picture this Milton Keynesian new utopia that they were talking about that was 15 years old. I just couldn't picture that at all. It was Little English Country Village. But on your 1950s description, right at the very start of episode 1, Dr. Richards and
Janet?
Yeah, Janet, the generic female character. She's coming out with her thoughts on just life in general, and he very...
You're going to have to change your politics, my girl, if you're going to be married to me.
Women, know your place. As Harry Enfield as it fucking comes, that bit.
My first note is the lead character is a misogynistic arse. And then an episode later, I added an extra note to that. Most characters are.
Yeah, the MP's wife in this starts out as a bit of a wet blanket, but actually, all the way through, she, for no reason at all, I mean, it's implied that there's some sort of history between Joseph Gomez and Hugh Deverill, the MP, and it's sort of touched upon that they've got history of just not liking each other very much, and he's called from overseas. Why an MP in Kent at that time would have anything to do with a scientist in Chile, I have absolutely no idea. But the first second that the MP's wife meets the scientist, and it came across that they've never actually met before, she suddenly starts calling him Joseph in a very familiar way. And then spills the beans on her marriage problems while he's twatting about with this sample of mud. She is hurling herself at this man. It's not encouraged or reciprocated. She's just, take me.
And if anything, it's battered down at every available opportunity. And I'm a widower and really not interested. And there's the door. Please leave through it.
I mean, all the way through, he calls her Mrs. Deverill. He's just not backing down on this. So, of all the characters in it, Roger Delgado, as you would expect, the god that is Roger Delgado, he was clearly my favourite character in this, because he was the only one that behaved like an actual human being.
He wasn't my favourite character, but of the main characters, yes, I'd say he was my favourite, but we'll come on to that in a second. The main characters suffered from that very 1950s BBC where everybody was terribly RP.
Except for the police officer, my dear.
Apart from the local yokels. There was no nuance in between. You either sounded as though you'd stepped out of Sandringham, or you sounded like Mr. Ploppy.
I'm laughing at this. The problem is with the slide. You introduced me to this ages ago. It must be 15 years ago, along with other things like the Kraken Wakes, Aliens in the Mind. It's all stuff from the same era. Yes. But I actually really like this slide, and I shouldn't. Because there's so many whacking great holes and faults in this thing, but it is very much... We were comparing notes the other day as we were re-listening to this thing, and your very first thing you said, the slide is very much of its time, and I really can't disagree.
Except that I thought its time was the 1950s. And seeing as I know that it was a rejected season 2 Doctor Who, that it couldn't have possibly been the 1950s, but it just feels so 1950s, doesn't it?
I've got to admit, it does feel a few years earlier than it's actually set, yes. The MP, goodness me, even before he is hypnotised by the mud, he has got ideas above his station. This is my town. We don't need to involve Whitehall in this national disaster. Yes, you do, mate.
Yes, Inspector, I put you where you are and I can put you back on the beat. You probably can't.
But even the inspector turns around, because he's there saying, right, Inspector, organise this, block all the roads, make sure that mudslide is blocked up and barricaded, organise the men. Yeah, I'm just a copper, mate. You don't worry about that, I can put you back where you are, you bastard.
Get whatever you need from the army base. The army may have a word or two to say about that.
Because the army, even in those days, would take no notice of an MP. It was a lovely, fluffy idea of how things work, but, yeah. I mean, coming on to this story itself...
Oh, no. I have another little comment when we're going down the misogynistic route.
He's off into the air raid shelter. Put your tin hat on.
And this is about the local yokel husband and wife. Oh, God, whose names I can't remember. And he gets a first name. She just gets Mrs. And there's one bit where he's worried about how she's getting affected by things. And when he's talking about it, saying, oh, the night before, she wasn't herself. She didn't even want to kiss me. And then when I did, she felt like a block by taking. Have you not heard of consent?
Where's the curtains drawn, woman? What are you sitting in here then? What you got in there then? Why don't we go with your sisters then? All I could picture was Sam Seeley, but he had Sam Seeley's look with Wilfred Bramble doing his old man steptoe voice. All I could picture was the cottage from Spearhead from Space.
Except Mrs. Seeley, if you tried to kiss her when she didn't want it, you would be wearing a frying pan.
Or a shotgun. She was another one that didn't fuck about. But yes, misogynism aside, what did you actually think of the story?
Well, I like the story, but then I've always liked Fury from the Deep. And it was very, very, very similar. And I'm quite gobsmacked that it was done within a year of Fury from the Deep and had been commissioned by Peter Bryant. Yes, this is marvellous. This is exactly what we want. And there were quite a number of things that were just, as well as the plot, picked up and lumped down. So the hospital doctor was Dr. Robeson.
Oh, yes.
The Welsh boss woman who's sympathetic to the character who's going insane and turns up and has the authority to sort things out at the end of the day. In Fury from Deep, there is a Welsh boss woman who turns up and is sympathetic to the authority character who is going off the deep end. Apart from the name, and this one did have a different name, it was pretty much exactly the same. Tug Wilson.
Tug Wilson, that's the name. Yes, that's the local yokel couple, husband and his wife. I must admit, I'm ashamed that I've not drawn the comparison with Fury from the Deep, because everything you just said there is spot on. Talk about selling the same thing twice to the BBC, but that's what Terry Nation did.
To the same person at the BBC.
See, I did quite like it. The major flaw that I've got with this, because, again, I'm listening to this through the prism of its time. The actual mud itself, this sentient mud, which... it contains this organism, but it's never really explained where it comes from, how it's got there. The resolution is a little bit Deus Ex, to be honest. They draw back the curtains, and somehow they've not realised that sunlight hardens the mud to stone. So then they concoct within a matter of seconds this plan that xenon arc lights will fire infrared through the pores of the mud and kill the organism. It's just all a bit, I don't know. I didn't really care for the ending. I thought it was just a little bit, shit, how do I get out of this?
It kind of made me think of Blade. And that whole bit where they throw those light bombs down in the sewers where all the vampires are, and the light just goes around corners and does what it needs to and wipes them all out. If light was able to penetrate into the mud, why hadn't that happened before?
The implication was that it was specifically infrared light and concentrated infrared light.
But infrared light isn't light, it's heat.
Well, effectively, yes. It was all just a little bit...
you know what? 1950s, I can forgive their science being... It's not the 1950s, is it? Fuck.
This is the same era as, some of the Doctor Who in the mid-60s, actually. The physics might be off. The science might be a little bit fanciful, but it's at least plausible. This was just... I don't know. I just felt that it was a little bit... Hello, dear listener. Did you know, by the way, that if you fire xenon arc lamps into sentient mud, it'll shrivel up and die? Well, I did not know that. Yes, let us do this now. Quick, switch on the lamps.
And the thing that I noticed in terms of science, they were all being terribly enthusiastic with their chemical formulae, and they got H2SO4 absolutely spot on. And then when they came to hydrochloric acid, it was HC1, because apparently nobody was able to read the script that said HCl.
I knew you would pick up on that. They were obviously very proud of that because it got mentioned quite a few times, didn't it?
Yeah, and it's fairly basic chemistry.
What does happen when you mix hydrogen and carbon, Dr. Exton?
Not a massive amount.
What, does it not turn into hydrochloric acid?
No, because that would be hydrogen and chlorine.
Yes.
That's a really, really minor point, and it made me giggle as a chemist, but actually it made no difference to the plot whatsoever.
I liked listening to these old radio plays because, to be honest, some of them are quite silly and fanciful, and things are done in a different way now. The audience expects more from a resolution, particularly with science fiction. They want a plausible resolution rather than a Deus Ex or a MacGuffin or some gobbledygook that they've cobbled together and, oh, if we refract the sun's light through this special crystal we mined in South America, then that should alter the chemical makeup at just this precise temperature and altitude in order to... And it's that sort of Deus Ex that I really can't stand. I just felt that they'd cobbled together on the hop. There was no logical progression to it. The whole setup, though, the setup and the progression of the story, I really liked. And certainly the way the characters behaved. I mean, you've got the local busybody played by Miriam Margolyes and the smug vet doctor astrophysicist Ken.
Oh, I didn't think Miriam Margolyes' character was the local busybody, because Miriam Margolyes was Tug Wilson's wife. She wasn't really a busybody. The busybody, who incidentally is my favourite character, was played by Noel Hood. And I had to look it up because I really, really thought it was Joan Hickson.
Really?
I thought she sounded exactly like Joan Hickson. That very sort of nasal intonation that Joan Hickson has.
Now that you said, I can see where you're coming from, but to be honest, I've not listened to this in so long, I'd forgotten she was in it.
She was Mrs. Wilson. She wasn't the local busybody.
Oh, she was. She was the one that was... I saw Ken's floozy wander off into the windmill, and I watched her all the way. And then, do you know, I saw them do this, and I saw them do that. Should we follow her? I thought, no, I've got things to do.
That was Noel Hood. The old biddy that goes into the windmill with him and then later on is insisting that her piano is rescued and ends up in her house as it collapses with the soldiers because she's insisting on her piano taking it. That was Noel Hood. Miriam Margolyes was the wife of Tug Wilson, who's one of the first ones to get affected by the mud.
Oh, well, I am amazed at that then, because I thought that the one who went into the windmill was Miriam Margolyes. It sounded just like her.
No, it's Noel Hood. I specifically looked her up because I thought she sounded so much like Joan Hickson. I'd say it does demonstrate just how much my job has changed with quite how paternalistic all of the medical characters were to the characters that they were looking after. But, you know, of its time.
Yes, that's true. I mean, I'm just one of the things I was thinking as I listened to this was that in the intervening 60 years, have things changed a lot?
Medically, yes.
Well, medically, inevitably, yes. But certainly from my perspective, looking at the way and the role of the MP, that has changed drastically since the 60s. But I don't think that he had quite the power that he thinks he had in 1966. They don't have that power now.
The final thing that I wanted to say was there's actually quite a lot of similarities to other Doctor Who stories, even though this isn't a Doctor Who story, but it basically is, and to other films and things that had preceded it. In terms of Doctor Who, there was a lot of Inferno in there as well as Fury from the Deep. And the whole thing coming up from the bowels of the earth and, okay, haven't drilled down for it, but turning people into killers, because the weed creatures in Fury from the Deep didn't turn anybody into a killer.
No, because nobody dies in Fury from the Deep. I noticed they're all very liberal with their handguns in this. Where the hell have they come from?
Yeah, so the whole turning into somebody murderous, that felt more Inferno to me. And there was a big feeling of the Hammer horror film X the Unknown.
Now, having not seen it, I don't know.
When Hammer started doing Quatermass films, they wanted to make original films and they wanted Nigel Neal to write them, and he refused. I think he'd fallen out with somebody. He fell out with a lot of people. So they started writing their own sort of Quatermass equivalent. Now, they couldn't use the Quatermass character, so they tried to do similar kinds of stories. And the one that they did was one called X the Unknown, which is this energy creature that comes up from the earth. And there's a lot of stuff that's really quite similar to this. And that, again, is stiff, upper-lipped, middle-aged, middle-class white men with pipes and three-piece suits staring off into the middle distance, being terribly Mr. Chumley Warner. The other parallel I wanted to draw was Lovecraft and the Cthulhu mythos. Big themes of the Cthulhu mythos are ancient horrors from the bowels of the earth turning up and turning people insane and murderous, which is kind of exactly what this is all about.
You've done a real deep dive into this.
No, it's just stuff that I thought of as I was listening to it. I generally don't do deep dives into anything. You know this by now.
We'll park that conversation there and rate this in earworms.
This is the song that never ends. Yes, it goes on and on, my friends.
What do you think?
7.
Yes, that's what I've got in my head as well.
I think there are a lot of flaws. I think it would be massively criticised, and rightly so, if it were made today. But it wasn't made today. It was made in the 1960s. It really does feel like a 1950s thing. And also, I think we have to give this some romantic points. What I'm thinking of is, I think this is when Victor Pemberton and David Spencer met, and they were together for about 70 years or something. So
I didn't realise they'd met around this time, right? Maybe it was on this.
I think this is the thing that they met as a result of.
As I say, you introduced me to this many years ago, and it's something I've come back to. I've heard this at least half a dozen times in the past 15 years. And yes, there are flaws with it. And yes, I still don't think the ending's brilliant, but it's a window into another time. And I always enjoy it. So it does have flaws. It's not perfect. It's not the greatest story in the world, but it's an enjoyable listen and I would recommend it.
Yeah, the other parallel that I remember that I wanted to draw was John Wyndham and his sort of 1950s, 1960s cosy catastrophes.
Oh, what a great expression. Cosy catastrophe.
Have you never heard that as a genre description?
No, that's brilliant. Oh, I'll be using that. No, I've never heard it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the cozy murder mysteries, cozy apocalypse, that kind of thing.
And they'll continue singing it forever just because.
So, to round us off, what are you recommending for us this month?
Podcast of the Week recommendation this month is a fiction podcast called Archive 81. I think it ran for 3, maybe 4 seasons, finished in 2019 because it was optioned by Netflix, I think, and it's in production with Netflix. It's a really clever, really creepy story that makes wonderful, wonderful use of the audio medium. It starts off with a character who is employed to sit in a bunker and listen to audio tapes. And that's all he's employed to do. And when he gets to the bunker, I think the only food there is cans of macaroni cheese and tins of peaches or something. It's all odd and creepy, and it's about a building where weird stuff happens. It's actually very difficult to describe without completely giving the plot away, and it is too good for me to give the plot away.
So that wraps us up for this month, boys and girls. Thank you very much for listening. Next month, continuing with the Victor Pemberton theme, we're going to be reviewing his Doctor Who story from the year after, which, as Dr. Exton has pointed out, is remarkably similar. It's the audio CD version of Doctor Who Fury from the Deep. It's alright, I suppose.
I'm not rising to that.
If you know Fury from the Deep, boys and girls, then you will know exactly how this is going to run. If you don't, welcome aboard for the ride. Until then, enjoy everybody. See you soon.
Bye now.
The Archive of Audio Antiquities featured Simon Exton and Ken Moss, and the announcer was Jenny at Blue Box 99. All featured soundtracks are the property of their respective producers, and no infringement of copyright is intended. Title music was by Edward White, and the programme was produced by Maverick Productions. For more information, please visit maverickproductionsuk.blogspot.com or find us on social media.